we get into all of this, I'm going to just allow some traffic to build as people are coming on board. And I want to wait a minute before I read your bio so that wonderful people can hear you. And so I'm going to fill a little space right now and just say that we are coming live from Rhythmia. People are starting to come in. Welcome, everybody. Welcome as you join. So glad to have you. We are super excited to talk today on Rise Up, Evolutionary Conversations, and to have an evolutionary conversation with Kirsten Wells. So I'm going to introduce you all to this amazing being that we have the great pleasure of being with today. And Kirsten Wells is, wow, MTOM. I could come up with a couple different acronyms for that, but that is a master's degree in traditional Chinese medicine from Emperor's College. And Kirsten is an expert in the field of energy medicine. She's invested more than 30 years studying different models of medicine that work with the human energy system and is a fellow with the Institute of Coaching at Harvard Medical School. That's Harvard, darling. Which is dedicated to the practice and scientific foundation of coaching in medicine. Kirsten teaches through her coaching programs essential tools and methods that allow individuals to discover and maximize deeper levels of personal happiness, well-being, and sustained change while creating lives which are aligned with their core values and personal vision. That's something that I think we can all get behind. Kirsten currently serves as a master coach, and I can back that up with the Brave Thinking Institute, and has invested thousands of hours working with patients and clients to help them learn the skills to navigate the gap between their current life and the life they absolutely love. That is it right there. Welcome, Kirsten Wells.
Oh, thank you, JJ. It is, what a deep honor and pleasure and privilege it is to be here with you and with everyone that's joining us. And as you're reading that bio, I'm thinking it's a lot of words. But basically, if I was to distill it down, I just really feel that I have the honor and privilege of really having one of the best jobs on the planet at this time, which is really to help individuals to just live from the center stream of their being, their soul's purpose, why they're here at this time on the planet, and to really make sure that those gifts and talents are delivered while we all have the gift of this human journey. And I think that's it in a nutshell, really. But
well, I personally am fascinated by that gap that you talked about, right? Mm-hmm. Like we see it at Rhythmia all the time. People come and something's awakened. I'm sure you see it at the Brave Thinking Institute. Something's awakened within them, and yet they go back to their lives, and ostensibly nothing externally has changed. There's been an internal activation, but the external world hasn't quite caught up to that. Okay. And there's that gap between our current formation and that which is seeking to emerge. Right. And the life that we love, the life that's being called for. So I would love to ask you, I personally know your story, but I'd love to know how you navigated that gap personally, and then some insights that you have around all of the work that you do with individuals around moving from current formation to that life and living in that germination period.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I think what the gap that we're talking about here, it's interesting. It's not a gap that happens just once, right? We know this. It happens over and over again as we live from one established pattern of life. And we're really talking about the gap is really between my current pattern of life and the new pattern of life that's seeking to emerge, and that I'm seeking to establish by listening and taking the steps, the action steps that are going to support this new pattern, the changes that I'm seeking to implement to take shape and form and establish themselves. And I think we all know that there's this gravitational pull to the familiar. There's a gravitational pull to the current pattern of life, which kind of maintains the status quo, if you will, of the life that we're currently living. So as soon as we start to live from a vision, there's going to be this gap between this current pattern of life and the new pattern of life seeking to establish itself. And again, I think that just, in my experience anyway, happens over and over again. I think if you've logged enough miles, meaning if you're, over 15 on this call, right? 20, and you start to log in the miles of chronological time and decades, you're going to see this repeating itself. And so, my story really is a rinse and repeat of that, but really one of the things I would say that was been the hallmark that I'm really living into now at this stage of my life is that I realize now that my listening skills, that really listening and to the inner callings, if you will, the inner impulses of where life was wanting to take me, and following that and taking those steps has really been probably a hallmark and a guideline for me all along. And it's certainly one of the things that I support the people that I have the privilege of working with in really developing that listening skill and then serving those impulses. So I can say, by the time I got around to formally studying medicine and formally studying energy medicine specifically, I was well into my 30s now, but I can see that impulse and things that would have led me there were in my life all along and had shown up in different areas of my life. But just to give it to you in a nutshell, by the time I really listened, I was in the film industry before I kind of jumped from that train and realized that, I'd had a lot of success in that industry. I'd had a lot of fun in that industry. I had served my creativity, the impulses of my creativity, but I wasn't really living from the center of my soul's calling. So I had an opportunity to take a sabbatical, which would end up really being my leaving that industry, but to really listen more deeply. And I realized that I was really here to serve. I was really here to help people to get in touch with their innate gifts and talents, get in touch with the center stream of their soul's calling and live that. And that would take me into the study of energy medicine and how the mechanics of this work. Because to circle back, when we're talking about the mechanics of this gap piece, right? Hold to the familiar. How do I establish a new paradigm? We're really talking about overriding the impulses of our nervous system, which are they're built in. This is hardwiring, that evolutionary hardwiring, really, when we think about it. I mean, think of it, it's not that many years ago, so to speak, that just, 100 years, 200 years ago, just getting through the day was the order of the day. Get to sundown. Don't get eaten, right?
Right. Get the water, chop the wood,
Exactly. So these impulses of the nervous system, particularly the sympathetic nervous system, which all of us know as fight or flight or freeze, particularly that hardwiring was very important. It was very important in establishing safety and establishing us being able to hang around and survive. Those impulses today, they are no longer appropriate in the same ways that they once were. And so an example of that might be something like, I'm going to establish my new online presence, my new business, my new fill in the blank there, whatever it is. And let's say I'm going to use the internet now as that modality to move that forward. If I go to hit send or open up the line, my nervous system reads this as exposure. Think of a gazelle on the Serengeti, right? That all that wide open space. Well, our mammalian brain doesn't know the difference between the Serengeti and the internet being exposed at this, so of course, part of me is going to go, oh, what are you doing? Don't do that. And so that's just an example of some of the things that we may encounter as we begin to serve this next, whatever the new pattern of life is and the steps we're taking to serve it. And we'll find ourselves putting our foot on the brake, holding ourselves back. So before we go down that rabbit hole too much further, I want to toss it back to you just to make sure we're kind of heading where you want to go here. But this is that gap piece it becomes very technical and also very easy, I think, to, once we notice what we're noticing and what we're working with, to strategize with it and to work it to our advantage and to support us in creating a new pattern.
We are so going down the road that I want to go down on. While you were talking, I was like, pulled out my notebook so that I could take notes. I was like, yes, this is exactly. So that's, if I look distracted, I was reaching down to grab my notebook. Like, I got to write this down. It's so good. And that, first of all, say the phrase again, the center stream of our soul's calling. Is that the phrase that you used?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different ways to say the same thing, but what I'm speaking to there is that we're really listening to the center stream of our being, our soul. And each of us comes in, if we work from the premise that each of us we're energetic beings, spiritual beings, you can say, having a human physical experience, right? That's a spectrum of energy. It's a spectrum of energy. One thing happening, we can think of it this way. part of that spectrum of our energy and our being is infinite. It has no beginning, middle, or end to it. It just is. But there's another part of us that's in physical form that does have a beginning, middle, and an end. It's a finite experience, the human part, the physical part of our journey. But each of us, when we come in and we have this individuated experience, if you will, that has an energetic signature to it, which we call, if we were going to put a name on that, we could say that's our soul's calling or our soul's purpose for this particular human journey. So that has an energetic signature to it that we want to really listen to the impulses of, I believe, and do our very best to serve it. I think of Henry David Thoreau here, where, when he did his experiment at Walden Pond, it was really about going to, in his words, suck the marrow out of life, and not get to the point where I died to just realize that I'd never really lived. And I think, taking a page out of Henry's book there, this is really about listening to that energetic signature and what are the impulses that are seeking to express through each and every one of us uniquely. Because here's the deal. Each of us is this unique emanation of this life force, which is one thing happening, but it's a unique emanation of it. And if we don't express that, it's really kind of mind-blowing to think, but it will never be expressed throughout all space and time.
That's very powerful, right? It's almost it fits perfectly with the spiritual principle that we are individualized expressions of this whole, and that we each have something unique, never to be repeated again, right? This current configuration will never be repeated again. And so if it's our obligation and birthright to express this fully and to not leave anything unexamined as we leave this particular iteration. So it's just so powerful. It makes, those moments in our conversation yesterday, makes those moments where you're looking at sort of the end of life, and saying, well, what am I doing right now? So that at the end of my life, am I going to be more concerned about that I sat and did nothing, or am I going to look back and go, I remember that day when I decided to put a stake in the ground and move further beyond my current formation. So beautiful. And now the next part of that is that gap that you were talking about, and that there's a certain set of comfort that we have in our current formation, even though we might want to move beyond it. And I think so many people struggle with that. Like, I really want to move beyond, but I can't seem to get out of this old pattern. And I think that's what you were talking about. Will you share a little bit more about moving beyond our current transformation, really, which is transformation, is moving beyond.
Yeah, literally in the word transformation, going beyond our current form, and bringing in and becoming something new in this new pattern of life. And absolutely. So we talk about living from these patterns, and the patterns aren't going anywhere. So I think one of the things I always like to say is, like, let's get really user friendly with how it works, because patterns are useful. I mean, you don't want to have to like relearn how to find your car keys every time, right? I mean, you know what I mean? Like, that would really start to get crazy. So we want the patterns. Patterns are useful, but using these patterns and understanding how they work and working with them in an appropriate user-friendly way, I think is really the deal. And part of that is then learning how to be comfortable. And I want to say this, there's a great statement, and I don't know who said this. I would love to give credit to it wherever credit is due, but is that, highly successful people are willing to be uncomfortable in the interest of growth. And, I think we don't want to be uncomfortable just to be uncomfortable, but learning how to be comfortable with being uncomfortable in the interest of growth is a very powerful space to be in. Knowing that something new is not going to feel right the first time, and giving myself permission to feel uncomfortable in the interest of growth, to feel uncomfortable knowing that this is a sign and signal of growth. I'm on my growing edge. I want this. So that's a key. Once I have my vision in place, so the vision of the new pattern of life, let's speak from that for a moment.
Yes.
let's talk about vibration. Everything runs according to vibration. So the vibration of my vision, the vibrational spectrum and frequency that's on, is not on the vibrational frequency and spectrum of my current life. It can't be. Otherwise, I'd be living it.
Mm-hmm.
So the things of where there's not a vibrational match here, those things of my current pattern of life will inevitably rise up. And this isn't to deter me. This isn't to stall me or undo me. This is actually a good thing. We want this because when it rises up, then I have the moment to, and I'm going to use a word here, recalibrate, which simply means to adjust my energy or to shift my energy in a way where now it's calibrated, adjusted to the new frequency of my vision. And when you think of calibration, you think of an instrument. We calibrate compasses as an example. Like if your compass is calibrated to true north, you're not going to get where you think you want to be. So the idea of calibrating is very important. One of the analogies I use is that if you think of a plane traveling from Los Angeles to New York on autopilot, it's actually off course 99%. I mean, it's really right up there of the entire journey. The reason it gets to New York is that it's been on, off, on course, off course, on course. It keeps coming back. It keeps calibrating to the course, yes. Calibrating. So we apply that in our own lives. When I learn, and I say learn, because when we dream up or we listen to the impulses of life that's seeking to express itself in a new pattern of life, we don't know ourselves in that form yet. We're learning about who we are. We're listening. I spoke earlier about really becoming a good listener to these impulses. Who am I as the man or woman living this life? Because that man or woman thinks a certain way. He dresses a certain way, approaches any content of my life in a certain way. And we want to begin to learn that. We want to begin to rehearse it. We want to begin to really invest our energy at that vibration. And then as things come up that are not a vibrational match, recalibrate them to this new pattern of life.
So powerful. So powerful, and that is, there's so much gentleness and release in that statement, right? That, so many times I know personally, and I'm certain many people listening have the same experience of, self-recrimination, right? I've set this new trajectory, I've set this new goal, and now I'm off course, and now I'm beating myself up because I'm off course, right? And this sort of idea of recalibration, of shoring up, right? Shoring up to our original trajectory, as a gentle knowing that I don't know how to be this person, that I'm learning how to be this person. Man, that opens up so much, because I know personally I tend to expect perfection of myself right out of the block. And then I'm either batting 1,000 or striking out, right? And there's no in between, So this is such a beautiful teaching, Kirsten, that, I don't know myself in this new formation. I have to learn who this person is and rehearse it. Wow. Can before I ask that question, I just have to say, I don't know if you can see the comments on your screen, but folks, are lots of wonderful comments, and in particular, Nicole Manson is joining us from Boston, and it's her 45th birthday today. So we just want to say happy birthday, Nicole, and thanks for spending it with us. And everybody else, thank you, everybody. Ramon and Russell and Cameron and Lyra and Shelly and Gail, who's actually here. So many people, Lisa, Angel, more people than I can name, but just thank you all for tuning in. Okay, just wanted to say hello.
Absolutely.
And back to the question of how the importance of rehearsing, and being in alignment with this new vision and the recalibration process. Can you speak a little bit more about that?
Sure. Well, I think, visioning is not a new technology. We know that. I mean, and really, I'm going to speak to it through the filter of, any professional athlete today has visioning, mental rehearsal and visioning as part of their tools and their training. There isn't anyone who is an elite athlete that isn't utilizing that. So let's look at it through the framework of this idea that when we rehearse something, and it doesn't matter what that is, it can be an athletic routine, but it can also be a life, when we start to rehearse those mental images from this life that we're living, that we're calling into shape and form, that we're creating, our nervous system, our brain, our entire system does not know the difference actually between what's imagined and what's in effect real. And so what we're doing as we are mentally rehearsing is we're actually laying down these new neuronal pathways in our physiology, in our brain, that are accommodating this new way of life, this new way of being. So this is why mental rehearsal is key. It's very important. And another example of this would be if you were an actor and I was a director and I just hired you and I hand you a script and I say, here's your character, here's your script. As an actor, I would go do the research on this character. I'd learn my lines. I would be, and so think of it that way as well. When we create this new, greater version, this greater yet to be of ourselves that's emerging, and I'll get to the vibration that it comes from, coming, but what would I love, right? Just dreaming it up, giving myself full permission to just, what would I love? And listening to my soul's impulses and that energetic signature that I've been speaking of. As I'm listening, I'm learning that. It's just like I'm starting to read my script, as it were, and rehearse and get to know who I am and practice that and put it on. And so this all becomes part of the process of holding an energetic state, vibrational state, that is a vibrational match to the life that I'm wanting to create and attract, so to speak. Now, most of us have been well steeped in this idea and the spiritual law of attraction.
Mm-hmm.
What's often not spoken to in these conversations around the law of attraction is the law of vibration.
Mm-hmm.
The law of vibration precedes the law of attraction. We must be a vibrational match to that which we're wanting to attract prior to it showing up in shape and form as a vibrational match. So that's an essential component as well. So the more I can mentally rehearse this, what is vibration? Vibration is actually it is a label that we put on, which is really a physiologic response to the thoughts I'm thinking. So what happens is I start to think thoughts, patterns of thoughts, those thoughts create a cascade of hormones and different chemical reaction in my system. We then call that a feeling or a feeling tone. And so that feeling tone is vibration. So to make it super simple, I think what we're really all looking for here is more thoughts and more mental rehearsal that's going to bring us into this feeling tone of expansive. It feels expansive. I love it. It's got what I like to call the yes factor to it. Like when I'm running it, I'm like, oh yeah, yes, that's got the yes factor. That's it. And so we're looking for that yes factor and less of the condition driven feeling, which is, we've all felt the feelings of feeling contracted. Fear, doubt, worry, anxiety, all under that umbrella of a condition driven spectrum, sympathetic nervous system, again, fight or flight response. So go ahead.
I want to ask you, so you said visioning.
Yeah.
And it sounded to me like you were talking about visualization. Right. And visualization is that rehearsal of I see myself doing this. What does this feel like? What does it taste like? My question is that seems to come from the known, right? Like that's from the realm of what I know. Like if I can think of it, I know it. It might even be something I know I don't know, but it's still known. I know that I don't know that. But there's that whole realm of I don't know what I don't know, which is the realm of infinite possibility. And so can you speak a little bit about that, the
Sure.
Visioning versus visualization, and kind of creating this space for an idea of, and I'll just say it this really quickly, I've never been somebody that can put together a 3 or a 5 or a 10-year plan. Somebody says, okay, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Like, I can tell you some of the qualities, what I'd like to experience quality-wise, but I wouldn't have said 5 years ago, I'm going to be the marketing director at an ayahuasca retreat center in Costa Rica. That's exactly the yes factor that I'm.
Yeah.
So can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Well, let's start there and work in reverse. But I'm really grateful that you brought up the clarification between a vision and visioning and visualization. So I'll speak to that in a moment. But let's just kind of hop on what you just said, because it's very important. 5 years ago, you didn't necessarily have all the details of where you are today. But I would imagine, and it's just a question I'm going to ask you, JJ, is that you probably were clear about the qualities. And
Yes.
I would imagine that if you did your sort of quality checklist right now, that a great percentage of those qualities are happening and you're experiencing and living into and from them.
Indeed.
Is that accurate?
That is accurate, yes.
Yeah. So for many of us, we're not going to, when we start the visioning and think of a vision as a blueprint for this new life, this new pattern of life. When I work with a vision, I work with 4 quadrants of a life, relationships, vocation, health, and sort of spirit. And then something that we call at the Brave Thinking Institute, time and money freedom, which is really a domain where when it's all, I'm living from this abundant energy, is like, this is where the overflow is, like, this is the overflow, that domain. So that's a blueprint, if you will, in all of those domains that to the best of my ability, when I begin to vision, and I want to say this about timelines for vision. Vision is not about time. It's about coherence. So what do I mean by that? I mean, it's not about, like, I can have a 3-year vision, but the more coherent I am to that vision, meaning embodying everything we've just been talking about at the vibrational level, like it's happening now, I can see calendar time collapse. So the 3 year becomes the year. I mean, it just, and this is where we have the synchronous meetings out of the blue and so on and so forth. This life begins to show up and take shape and form and emerge. That is a response to the vibration that I've been transmitting. So the vibration is about is the more I can be that vibration and be it now, the 3-year vision vibration now, it's about coherence, not about time. So to that point, not all of us, when we come to work with all the domains, are able to, like, dot all our I's and cross all our T's. We have some ideas about what we would love. We have many of us, I'm very much in your camp, JJ. I'm much more of a kinesthetic feeling, like I know what I want to feel, and but the pictures of it actually come after the feeling tone for me.
Yes.
And then the pictures, so we're just doing our best. And again, not just allowing ourselves to find our way in this process that feels natural and right to us. As an example of this, one of the things that we encourage when we're writing a vision is to have as much detail as we're aware of, as much specificity as we can put together. And paint pictures with our words that evoke, these images that we can transmit and hold. But I've had clients who've said to me, I have one guy just reminding me, and bless him, because he gave me this gift of understanding that this is how it is for some people. He's like, I just can't write all that flowery prose stuff. The way I connect with my vision is, I said, well, tell me more. Tell me, how do you? And he said, well, bullet points. And I'm like, well, bullet points it is.
Bullet pointed up.
Yeah, so he just had these bullet points, and he would go through his bullet points every day and tune himself to those bullet points, be connected to those bullet points. And that worked for him. So there isn't a one size fits all, so to speak, for this technology when we're creating the vision, which is the blueprint. The visualization part of this, however, when we go to mentally rehearse, that does have some key specificity to it, some specific notes that are important. One is, to the best of your ability, when you're closing your eyes and putting yourself in the picture, you're not watching yourself as an observer in the picture, meaning I'm not seeing myself in a movie kind of thing. I'm actually looking around me in the scene as if I'm seeing myself in it. So, if I was going to say calling in the love of my life or something, I might be walking down the beach. I might feel that person's hand in my hand and might be able to sort of see the side of their body, or I might feel them come up and wrap their arms around me. I can't see them necessarily, but that I'm in it. I'm in the experience when I'm visualizing. That's an important piece. There was something else I was going to say about the actual process of visualizing. 5 sensorizing it is really also very useful. What does the image that I put myself in, what does it sound like, taste like, smell like? I mean, as much as I can 5 sensorize it, it brings it, vibrationally alive in a way that is powerful. So, one of the greatest examples of this that I like to share when I'm teaching this is, founder of the Brave Thinking Institute, mentor, friend, and colleague of mine, Mary Morrissey, who you know very well. one of the ways that, she 18 years old, she was diagnosed with fatal kidney disease. She was given 6 months to live. At that time, she had an infant son. Her vision at that time, I mean, she didn't have all this technology. We didn't have, sort of the understanding of mind-body connection and all of this. But there was a woman who had come to her bedside the night before her surgery. And basically the surgery at this point was just to keep her comfortable for the next 6 months. I mean, it wasn't really a cure. There was at that time no dialysis or kidney transplants available. I mean, it was really just comfortable for another 6 months. But this woman who came to her bedside and was a chaplain at the hospital, gave her 3 images to leave the hospital with after the surgery. So this is really, this woman's genius and brilliance, and was giving Mary a code for visioning and visualization. Now, she just gave her 3 images. One was she's walking John, her then infant son, into his first day of kindergarten. And she can feel his little hand in hers as she walks down the hallway. She can hear the click of her heels as they walk down the hall. They round the corner and into a classroom where there's a smiling teacher waiting to greet John for his first day of kindergarten. Now, that's a very simple snapshot image. We call it a scaffolding image, where, Mary could hang her mental hat every single time, she was thinking the doctors were giving information around, you've got 6 months to live, and, all of that you can imagine the fear that was going through her. And her sole desire was to live, to raise her son. So it's a very simple image with a lot of potency to it. And it also means one thing. It means Mary would have lived 5 years. So there's a 5-year vision for you in a snapshot. And then the other 2 were, she's at a senior high school graduation in an auditorium, caps and gowns. She hears seniors' names being called. John's name is one of them. And he goes across the stage to receive his diploma. The third, she's in the front row at a wedding. She's mother of the groom, and John's marrying the love of his life. Now that takes her out over the next 3 decades. And very potent when you can imagine that, if you were 18 and facing a death sentence.
Super powerful. And I'll say, just on that vein, is so much of the history of New Thought, timeless wisdom, which is a tradition that we both very much come from. It came around people facing tremendous illness, and through the power of thought, through the power of training the mind, the scientific mind treatments, and those are potent scientific mind treatments, are able to affect physical reality.
Absolutely.
Right. And now we know with quantum physics that we absolutely do. Our thinking affects reality. But then it was just a belief. On this same vein as well, and I want to go back to this, beautiful visioning is the blueprint, visualization as the tactile, 5 sensorizing it, which is beautiful. One of our listeners, Georgie, asked this question, and I think I'll share my little brief answer to it, but I want to hear yours as well. He asked, does the past affect the future, or does the future affect the past? And of course, we know none of those exist. And it's the now that affects the now. But just as you're asking, as Georgie is asking this question, I think it's an interesting point of departure for what we're talking about in terms of how the present moment, we build one moment onto the next.
Yeah, I mean, this is where, as Einstein said, and others in the scientific, particularly in frontier science. I mean, this is where it gets, this is a scientific term, spooky.
Right.
And it is, because what we're learning, and we really are on our growing edge here, particularly with understanding the mechanics of how this works. We really don't. We're having ideas about it. But it's really fascinating, when we get into this idea of, I'm going to use the words eternal now, when we get into that vibration, that energy, where we are really one with everything that has ever been, that will ever be. Like when we think about in physics, quantum physics, particularly wave potential, I mean, all potentialities simultaneously exist. Which
just wrap your mind around that.
Right. I mean, it's like, okay, I'm going to have my juice now and contemplate that for the next year. I don't even know how to, like, so, but I always like to go back to, but okay, that's great. But how do we apply that in our own lives? So let's go back to Georgie, like, well, what does this really mean around the past, present, and the future? And I think, the good news is that we understand in a quantum nature and a quantum experience that it's the observer that has the effect in all of this. Mm-hmm. And so that is actually from this place called superposition, where I will affect the experience, both present, future, and we've now done, not me, but as a group, we've done studies which also show the effect of the past as well. Like it's all sort of simultaneously happening. So I think this is something to be very curious about in our mm-hmm. own experience of it. I think it's something to really explore. When I talked earlier about us being one thing, a spectrum of energy, part of that spectrum is infinite in its nature. The more that we can really access that part of ourselves and ask questions of it and be present to it, and it will respond to us and give us information and show us things. And I think that's a very interesting, as we start to have this relationship with the full spectrum of our being more and more, it's a very interesting place to be.
I heard someone say recently, the soul is not in the body, but the body is in the soul. And that's that greater spectrum that we've condensed into this physical form, and yet there's this greater part of us. Even here at Rhythmia, we follow one of the shamanic traditions that we follow is the Shipibo tradition, and the Shipibo tribe believes that when we come in to this form, we come in on our ancestral line, all of our genetic history, our family history, and we come in on our karmic line, our sort of eternal history, and they take form here. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the healing that takes place that I think we do here at Rhythmia in plant medicine and breath work that you do at the Brave Thinking Institute in terms of all of the formation of our thinking, right? This is what we're talking about, the way that we can create ourselves and speak something into existence, right? All of this is healing those ancestral lines and karmic lines and affecting our physical being today.
Absolutely. Now. I think what you're speaking of in I'm just going to use the language that I've been speaking from in this idea of recalibration. I think a place like Rhythmia is a beautiful opportunity to recalibrate energies that are looking to be calibrated for their full expression. Mm. And and kind of the visual that I had as you're describing, the sort of ancestral lines and the karmic lines coming in, and kind of like that idea that I'm creating a moment in time, space and time, to recalibrate these energies, going all the way back, right, and all the way forward if we're going to use a linear bar here. But that idea that there's this opportunity and to come out of this calibrated, like for me the word that comes to my mind right now is integrated in a new way.
Absolutely. And so much of our work, and I know that it is the work at the Brave Thinking Institute as well, is that follow-up. Like, you can go to a great seminar, you can come to a great retreat here, you can go to a great seminar, but if you're not doing the work after, 50% of what happens is your continuous integration of that work. Integration is such a key component. Kirsten, we're a few minutes, like the time has flown by. I know. Speaking of that zany thing called time. I mean, wow. I just gems. This is actually what people are saying. Gems that are that you're sharing. I'm so grateful.
I'm like, oh, okay. Hold on 1 second.
You can see it. Okay, good.
No, now I can see it. Yes. Hi, hello, beings.
Yes. I have one one last question for you.
Sure.
And it's kind of my standard last question,
Sure.
which is, I always say my favorite saying. One year at Thanksgiving, my brother-in-law said this, and I thought it was pretty funny. He said, we were going around saying what we're thankful for before eating. And then he comes up with this. He says, I want to remind everybody never to judge anyone unless you've walked a mile in their shoes. And we were like, oh, really? We're waiting to eat so you can spout this dribble, whatever. And he goes, and I want you to remember that once you've walked a mile in their shoes, you're a mile away and you have their shoes. So, but to that extent, if you can walk a mile in my shoes, what is the question that, or topic that you would have liked to have talked about that we didn't get to? Or is there something that you'd like to share? What question would you have asked that I didn't, I guess is the right way to say that.
Wow. I don't know that there's any question per se that I would have asked that we haven't touched on, JJ. I think if we had more time, I think where I would love to have gone or to go is, again, because for me, it's all about the mechanics and making it very user-friendly, is it probably would have wanted to dial into some tools. The gravitational pull that you're speaking about, when we have this expansive change, we go to Rhythmia or you come to a coaching experience or weekend or seminar, and we're all pumped up and it's all this expansion, and then we go back to the familiar and back to these patterns we've been speaking about, and the gravitational pull and the contraction to that is something that we're all going to work with. And so having the tools and the strategies to continue to work and to calibrate our energy to this greater form of life that we're calling in and co-creating, that's it. That would probably be the only other piece here in this moment.
Well, I think we're going to have you back then.
I would love that. I would love that.
Oh, right. I am so grateful. And, I am in awe of the mystery and magic of life. And I'll just share this briefly with everybody. Kirsten and I met 10 or 11 years ago. I was working at a yacht company, and Kirsten and Mary Morrissey and her kids all came in because they were going to do an event on one of our party boats for one of your training groups. Definitely. And how funny it is that there's no way you could do it on the boat now because you're too big. But then you could fit on one of the boats, right? And then years later, without knowing it, we had been living next to each other, like right across the pathway from each other. Neighbors.
Literally neighbors. I mean, that to me actually was one of the most, just to tie a bow around this connection with JJ. So we'd had that experience of meeting JJ. I loved him right out of the gate. What's not to love here, right? I mean, I was just like, we all fell in love with JJ. But then I think was it a month later that I was walking out of my front door and bumped into you? When was the timing of that we learned? Maybe it was longer.
I think it was years later. We saw each other at Agape.
Agape, okay.
And I think it was years later that we realized we lived next to each other.
Yes. So I'm walking out of my front door one morning, and I guess it was years later, but
maybe not. I can't remember it.
We've established there's no time.
There's no time.
But anyway, I see JJ, and I'm like, wait a minute. Wait, what are you doing here? He's like, what are you doing here? I'm like, I live here. I live here.
And so I get to have coffee with this beautiful being. Whenever I'm in town, I call and say, meet at our spot, and we have a cup of coffee and chat, and it's just always lovely. Thank you so very much, Kirsten.
Thank you so very much.
And you can find out more about Kirsten. Your website is just kirstenwells.com.
Yeah, but actually, you can also go to bravethinkinginstitute.com. That's probably where the work that that'll get you there. So
yes.
Thank you so much for inviting me here. It's what a privilege and a pleasure to be here with you guys.
It is equally felt. Many blessings, and to you, Kirsten, and to everyone, knowing that life is a path of ever increasing good, ever widening fields of awareness, and an ever deeper connection with the source of all of life. So I'm eternally grateful, and I look forward to our next time together here and in person very soon.
Yes. Call me. We'll have coffee.
Yes, we'll have coffee. Thank you all so much for joining us. Have a beautiful, beautiful